People have been drying meat for thousands of years. It's the simplest way to prepare it. It's the best way to store it. It also makes it very tasty, and it's a lot more nutritious from cooked meat. Now, all we're doing today is the beef has been cut up and in 1/4 thick slices and put in marinade. Now, marinade is for tenderizing and flavoring, and it just has 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of liquid smoke, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoonful of red pepper, and 2/3 of a cup of water. You put it in the bowl, mix it up, and you put your beef in there, or your mutton, or your deer, or whatever, and you let it soak in there for a half hour or overnight. It doesn't matter how long you do it, just so it's got the action. And then you take the pieces and you lay them out on the tray, just so they don't touch each other. And also you want to make sure that you don't lay it directly over the center, because the light bulb is down there. And the reason you don't want to do that is because the beef or whatever drips, and you'll just drip it all over your light bulb, and you don't want to do that. But basically this is all in the world there is to doing it. And then when you have it in there, you check it about every 3 hours, and maybe you turn it over, maybe you switch the top tray to the bottom tray, and so on like that, just so it's all evenly done. And it'll be done in from 6 to 10 hours, something like that. But since a 100-watt bulb only costs 10 cents per 24 hours, at least in Arkansas, it's not going to be an expense. And then when you're all done with it, what you'll have is very tasty, actually delicious beef jerky, much better than what you can buy in the store, because this doesn't have any preservatives like they have to use. And you can use this for camping. Now, if you're going to store it, you've got to make sure that it's dry, and then you put it in plastic baggies and seal it real nice. And it should stay that way indefinitely. You ought to test it maybe about every couple of months, and if it's starting to spoil or get a mold on it, just put it back in the dryer, and that'll kill all the mold. A thermos jug cookery is the same as the old fireless cookery, and that's where you put your food and the water it's to be cooked in a pan and get it to the boiling point, and then you put it in the thermos jug. And then overnight, the nearly boiling water will cook whatever you put in there. It doesn't cook beans, for instance, and it won't cook corn, but it will cook wheat, rye, basically just about anything else you can think of, even meat. And a thing that you've got to figure out first, when you first get your thermos jug, is to put the wheat and whatever you intend to cook on a steady basis, and fill up the thermos jug to the point to allow for the cap, and then you pour it out into the pan, and you sort of mark the pan so that you know from then on how much to put in the pan, so because you don't want to overfill it, you don't want anything left out. And this way, after a while, it will be just second nature to do it without any measuring or anything. And of course, then you put in the 4 ounces of wheat, and you stir it. And to put the food into the thermos, what you need is a funnel. And what I use for a funnel, and what you can make too, is simply the top of a 1-gallon milk carton cut off. That makes a very good funnel. And you need a funnel because you're not going to have time to lift it out and spoon and everything like that, because you don't want your water to get any cooler. So also you need to add some salt, otherwise it'll taste very bland. And you can put as much as you like. And of course you can put peppers or whatever you like to flavor it, unless you want it as a breakfast food to be served with milk and sweetening. Now it's just about to boil now. See, it doesn't take long. This is all the energy you're going to use to cook it, whereas it would take about 2.5 hours on the stove to cook wheat. And if you had several of these thermos jugs, when the brownouts come, then you could cook all of your meals with just about 5 minutes of power, like if you had all the burners going. Now, as you can see, it's boiling merrily, and what we do next is we just turn off the energy, lift it up there, pour it in the funnel as quickly as you can with safety. And if there are any grains in there, just scrape them out. Then force that down through there. Put on the stopper nice and tight. Shake it up a little bit, lay it on its side because you don't want it to clog at the bottom, and then you're ready to go the next morning, and that's really all there is to it.
Some of you write that regardless of all the information in the poor man's James Bond, you still have difficulty getting bomb components. Well, bless your heart, Clyde, anyone can make a bomb. You can make one by using odds and ends available even during an enemy occupation. You start with a carton of book matches and cut off the heads. This is tedious work for one, but an evening's fun for the family if you can drag them away from the TV. The next step is to process the match heads for fuses. Put the match heads in a cup and fill it halfway with boiling water. Stir, and in a few seconds the paper will be separated and floating on top. Then pour the contents through a screen and into a bowl. Discard the paper from the heads and evaporate to the liquid. When it's down to a thin mush, like this, it's time to make your fuses. For the fuses, you cut about 20 10-inch lengths of medium-sized cotton twine. Next, provide a metal surface, like a baking pan. Then put lengths of twine in the well-stirred mush one at a time and slosh them around. You might add a 1/4 teaspoon of mucilage glue to the mixture for sticking power. When they are well soaked and coated, take a pair of tweezers and pull the fuse out by an end. Next, gently scrape down the fuse to remove clots and any excess mush. Then lay the fuse on the metal surface. When your fuses are nicely laid out, put them in a 200-degree oven for about 20 minutes. If you don't have an oven, use your food dryer, or else set them outside in the sun. When dry, release the fuses by running a razor knife or other sharp blade underneath them. These fuses should not go out, but don't bend them or handle them any more than necessary. Now for the detonators. Get some 1/2 or 5/8 inch PVC tubings and some caps like these from your hardware store. Cut the tubing into 3.5 and 4.5 inch lengths. Drill a 1/8 inch hole in one of the two caps. To make sure the caps will go on all the way, put them on first without glue and mark around them with a pencil. That way, when putting them on for good, you'll know they're all the way on if they reach the lines. The heads from one carton of book matches will fill 6 3.5 inch tubes. Here we have your match heads, a fuse, your 3.5 inch detonator tube, and caps drilled and undrilled, and the 4.5 inch tube and milk jug cap. Now to make the detonator. You first take a fuse and put one end through the hole in the top of the cap. Now, you might have to moisten the fuse and twist the end to make it go through. Pull the fuse 3.5 inches through. Then spread super glue around the top and sides of the tube. Push the fuse in the tube and force the cap down to the line. Next, pour in the match heads. Flick the tube frequently to make the heads settle in place and make room for as many heads as the tube will hold. Then super glue on the bottom cap. For my demonstrator detonators, I used a heavy expanded steel screen to catch the fragments to see how they shattered. Many of the pieces ripped right through the screen, as you can see. These are the fragments of the PVC tubing showing what 160 match heads will do. So these detonators are not firecrackers or any kind of toy. They are powerful small bombs and can injure and even kill. Before attaching the top tube to the detonator, cut a hole through a milk carton cap and press it about 1 inch down the tube. The main consideration is to ensure that the tube surrounding the fuse coming out of the detonator is sealed to keep the gasoline out. The best method is 4.5 inch length of PVC tubing glued to the detonator cap with a glue gun. Start the gluing by putting a line of glue around the tube's end and pressing it to the detonator cap. Glue guns cost about $10 and have so many uses you should not be without one. When it's set, put a layer of glue around the whole cap and up the tube about 1 inch. You might also put a ring of glue around the bottom cap. Gasoline is very volatile and will go through thin plastic or plastic tape in seconds. The thick layer from the glue gun, however, will give you the seal you need, since the detonator won't be in the gasoline for more than a minute before it goes off. When the detonator is completed, and just before you're going to use it, fill the milk jug with gasoline to the curve. To arm it, you simply take off the cap, put the detonator in, screw it nice, then light it and run like crazy because you don't have a lot of time. And now for the fang. There are two designs, but first the poison, nicotine. Buy a box of Copenhagen or Skoal and dump it in a cup. Then put in 2 ounces of rubbing alcohol and let it set overnight. The alcohol keeps the nicotine from breaking down. Then pour the mess into a piece of cloth. Next, twist it until no more liquid comes out. This is a lethal poison, and only a few drops in the bloodstream is fatal. The perfect delivery system for liquid poisons is the fang, of which there are 2 models as you've seen. This first being the pocket model. As you can see, the components are simple. There is first a hypodermic syringe and needle. The top of the syringe is cut off, as is the edge of the end of the plunger. A 1 1/2 inch strip of plastic tape is folded over and a hole is punched. This tab is put on and a number 18 gauge needle is then twisted on. A 1/8 inch slice of a 1/2 inch dowel is then glued to the end of the plunger and glued around and pushed into a 3 11/16 inch piece of 5/8 inch PVC tubing. The end of the tubing is ground to aid in putting on the cap. The cap is a 12 inch by 3 inch length of common paper tape. But first, glue a 2 inch length of paper tape around the tube so the rolled cap will fit the painted tube. Then a 1/8 inch slice of 5/8 inch dowel glued and shoved in the end. After painting the tube, a 1/4 inch wide by 8 inch length of plastic tape is wrapped around the tube 1 1/8 inches from the front end. This keeps the cap from touching the needle's tip. To load, the needle's tip is put into the poison and the tab is held between the thumb and forefinger. The tube is then pulled back until the front end of the syringe is visible. This ensures 1 cc of poison in the syringe. If properly made, the cap should be tight enough to stay on the tube, but loose enough to stay in the pocket when the fang is withdrawn from the cap. Might sew a seam down the side of the pocket which will hold the cap while the fang is being withdrawn. To use, just jab the needle into any fleshy part of the body. Now, for lack of a Russian, I'll use this box. As soon as the thrust is completed, the fang is withdrawn and put into a side pocket without bothering about the cap. Depending on where the thrust hits your opponent, he should be down in about 5 seconds. In this short time, he won't be able to react or even to let anyone know he's been attacked. Now we come to the super fang. It's not as the original, but it's what you need when you really want to reach out and touch someone. Its X length will make it less noticeable. For instance, you're in a bar standing beside 2 Russians. Your super fang is tucked in your belt or in your sock. You take it out, arm it, reach around the first Russian, and thrust it into the nether quarters of the furthest Russian. If your victim is as hardy as Russians are purported to be, he may have time to clobber his comrade. Then his comrade would clobber him just as his knees were buckling. It would be obvious that one Russian killed the other, so you would have killed 2 birds with 1 stone, as it were. I'm sure you can come up with many ideas of how to make the extra length come in handy. And don't discount the flat black finish, which makes it nearly invisible in dim light. The super fang has 2 different locking mechanisms to keep the needle in place both at rest and when armed. This first is less complicated but not so handy, as the user must look at it in order to prepare it for use. This might necessitate going to the john to arm the weapon. Even so, in most cases, this should present no problem. This basic super fang is composed of a piece of 5/8 inch PVC tubing exactly 11 3/8 inches long. A 1/8 inch hole is drilled 7/16 of an inch from the end. The action consists of a 7 7/8 inch length of 3/8 inch dowel. 2 1/8 inch holes are drilled into one end, the first a 1/2 inch from the end, and the second 1 7/8 of an inch from the first. One end of the dowel is notched to give greater surface to the glue between the dowel and the hypo's plunger. The flat of the plunger is cut around so there is no part wider than the dowel. A glue gun is best to attach the dowel to the plunger. The PVC tube and the dowel are painted with a non-reflective flat black. This makes the weapon hard to see in dim light. A black glove would conceal your hand so that in reaching out no one would notice your arm, hand, or super fang. Finger hold is cut off the body of the hypo to make it fit easily into the PVC tubing. After 1 cc of poison is drawn into the hypo, a peg is pushed through the tube's hole and into the second hole in the dowel. This fits snugly and keeps the needle from sticking the operator. To arm the super fang, the peg is removed, the large dowel is pushed forward flush with the tube, and the peg reinserted. To leave the needle exposed is to take the chance of sticking yourself when you put the fang back into your belt or sock. So be sure to return the dowel to the unarmed position. Now for a word about the needles themselves. Unlike needles for people, these are number 18s for livestock and are much stronger and will go through any clothing without bending. They can be bought at just about any farm supply store. This next model The peg is glued into the single hole in the dowel, which is only 6 1/8 inches long. Instead of the single hole in the PVC tubing, a router is used to make a 2 1/4 inch slit with one notch at the bottom and another one a 1/2 inch from the end. To use, flip the end notch at the bottom and into the other notch. You don't want the slide area too loose, as that might cause it to arm itself. If yours is too loose, simply give that area the necessary number of coats of paint to make it tighter. Either superfang is relatively easy to make if you have all the materials at hand.
Now I'll demonstrate the hydrochloric acid goodie. This isn't really dangerous, since one whiff will make anyone run for an exit. But it is fun and will clear a room if panic is desired.
Hydrochloric acid, also called muriatic acid, is common swimming pool acid and is bought cheaply in most supermarkets in areas where there are swimming pools. It is also used for cleaning grouting off newly laid tile, and so it is sold by most hardware stores. It is best used with chunks of aluminum from cans or tubing. Simply fill a can half full of aluminum and pour in about a 1/2 pint of hydrochloric acid. The beauty of the hydrochloric acid goodie is that it acts upon aluminum to produce great clouds of dark, thick, choking fumes. For clearing out rooms or even among crowds outside, it's a real gas. The beauty of the hydrochloric acid goodie is that it acts upon aluminum to produce great clouds of dark, thick, choking fumes. For clearing out rooms or even among crowds outside, it's a real gas. This is guaranteed to clear any room, theater, or bar.
The nice thing about this is that you have nearly a full minute to clear the area before it starts working.
The hydrochloric acid goodie can also be used as a noise bomb. It isn't very dangerous, but goes off with a bang that will make people think WW3 is started. Simply cut up 2 aluminum soft drink cans and put them in a 2-liter plastic pop bottle. Pour in about a 1/2 pint of hydrochloric acid and screw the cap on tightly. You have about 45 seconds before the acid reacts with the aluminum and up to 3 or 4 minutes before the pressure builds up enough to explode the bottle.
With an ice cube. This parlor trick is covered in Granddad's wonderful book of chemistry, page 156.
One trick for the David Letterman show was how to light a cigarette with an ice cube. Now, to do that, I need a sliver of metallic potassium or sodium, but I've got potassium right here, and potassium is a little more volatile. Now, you see the shiny side. If it gets oxidized, forms that white stuff on it, then it won't work very well. But the way to do it is to put a sliver of it in the end of a very dry cigarette. It's like that. Then here, it works after a fashion. But what I neglected to do on the David Letterman show was to make sure that the cigarettes had been dried in an oven, because the moisture caused the sliver of potassium to oxidize so the water didn't penetrate, and it just sputtered and made a very dumb-looking trick. Now, next I tried to light a fire with water, and the trick to that was to have some ether in a pan with the bit of sodium or potassium metal, and when I poured the water in it, it was supposed to get to the metallic sodium or potassium and light it, and of course it in turn would light the ether. But what happened was that most of the ether had gone away and the metallic sodium had oxidized, so it wouldn't light. And it just sputtered like that. And so that was, well, there you go. Got the camera on it? Yeah. Projects don't consider me as any final authority. I've tried to simplify everything, but I hope you can simplify them even more. I've developed my talent for improvising through my study of 19th and early 20th century science and technology. You can too. Just buy The Survivors and the Poor Man's James Bond series, and you'll be fascinated by all the clever gadgets and processes worked out by people just like us.
In 1972, I was living in Eureka, California, and shortly after I published the first edition of the Poor Man's James Bond, I got a call from a man in Arcata who invited me to a party there, so that there was a man there who would like me to meet, and he had something for me. And so I went, and it turned out this man was an anarchist. And he had been setting off bombs in San Francisco. That was when the Vietnam War was still going on, and everybody was paranoid about everything. And of course, I've been heavy on the right. I've been out of it for a few years, but it still interested me. Anyway, so he offered me a copy of Ragsdale's Arson by Electronics for a copy of my book. Of course, we traded. Well, they can't hear me?
I got it now.
Oh, you got it now? We get set up and I'll go on. You tell me when. Okay. Anyway, so he said that he and his girlfriend had attended an anarchist seminar at Stanford University in Los Angeles. In San Francisco. And it was conducted by the professor in electronics. Held in the basement, and he had a big stack of Arson by Electronics by Ragsdale, or Tallahassee, Florida, fireman. And everybody who attended would get one of those free. And anyway, he told me about how when they were coming up from San Francisco to Eureka, their red Volkswagen, which every hippie had, was leaving from side to side, and he explained that he thought that he had been going through the glove compartment and wasn't keeping his eye on the road. And they were stopped by a couple of highway patrolmen. Well, the highway patrolmen searched the van. They were handling alligator clips, pipe caps with holes drilled in them, all kinds of electrical stuff. Setting it aside, they were looking for dope. The girl said she nearly soiled herself. She used another term. But anyway, they were on their way up to Portland. They were going to set off a few bombs there. Well, the next day I called the highway patrol and told him about his troopers.
And so he invited me to give a talk to their people about the recognition of bomb-making paraphernalia. And so I did. And then I got an invite to talk before the Eureka Police Department and the FBI. And that was fun. And then I started giving lectures to all the rookie graduating classes of the cops in College of the Redwoods. And then I got invitations to talk before fire marshals conventions in California. And I found that whereas you people know dope paraphernalia, and you can tell if a guy is carrying burglar stuff in his car, when it comes to paraphernalia for improvised weaponry, total ignorance, and it's dangerous ignorance. At one time, about that time, the police in Los Angeles got a call about domestic violence, and they went to a house. The door was ajar. The room was entirely empty except for a suitcase on the floor. So Laurel and Hardy marched in there, opened up the suitcase, and died. Now, so what I'm doing is giving sort of a course on improvised weaponry and how to spot the different paraphernalia. Now, I'm not trying to make bomb squatters out of you people or anybody else. If you see something you think might be an improvised weaponry, get away from it, call the bomb squad. That's their job, but don't touch it. Because for one thing, it's evidence. So what you want to do is just examine it for what it is and learn to recognize it. Now, also, there's so much about terrorism today. There's this kind of paranoia. You see on your TV, well, a lot of times you see me on there, and I'm a bad guy. What the media does is they want to project a story about bombs and terrorists and teenagers and psychotics, and they present it in a very attractive way because it is interesting. And yet there might be a public outcry, well, here you're giving all these people ideas. And they say, oh, no, our main reason is to show what fiendish Kurt Saxon was to put this material out. Well, this material has been out for so long. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard of the Winston's Bomb Disposal Guide, published in 1965, long before my book, so the Annex Cookbook was out. And it showed everything to do with making bombs. And like for 1954, let me get my glasses here, from the New York Journal American, Wednesday, December 26, 1956, right there to show everybody who's got the papers is how to make a bomb. So bomb making is very simple, and anybody who wants to can do it. Actually, there's never been a bombing because someone had a book. And there's never been a prevention of a bombing because someone didn't have a book. Of course, some bombers have books, but if they don't have books, they can still make bombs. Now, Ted Kaczynski didn't need a book. The guy that blew up the Muir building in Oklahoma City didn't need a book. So the information is out there. It's all over the internet, and it's been there long before I came on the scene. And what I'm giving you free is like the U.S. militia, and if you will look at the first page there, it's front page on bombings, expose or hoax. And this will give you a very good idea and an overview of the bomb situation in this country and how the media handles it. But anyway, for instance, getting back on the books part about people who can bomb places without books, let me read you an excerpt, because I was called before the Senate in August of 1970, and part of the testimony was, Senator Percy, you feel that law enforcement is not effective in dealing with it. Is that right? Me. I feel that it is not effective. In fact, an article in this latest magazine shows that it is not effective. It shows how, now this is the August 3 edition of U.S. News and World Report. It tells how during these 15 and a half months, Mr. Hickel noted so-and-so 4,350 explosives and incendiary bombs which killed 40 and injured 384 citizens and which caused property damage estimated at almost 23 million. Evidently, the police weren't able to do much about that. Well, that just gives you an idea. These people didn't use books. There weren't any such books in the field at that time. But what you want to understand is there's a certain type who is a terrorist. It's a common misconception that an interest in improvised weaponry means criminality. Well, that's like saying that an interest in guns means murder and shooting, or a guy buys liquor that he's going to be a drunk driver. Well, it can happen, but you don't want to act on that misperception because in most cases you'd be wrong. But anyway, if you want to understand the mind of a terrorist, if you've got a teenage son, now the teenage boy knows everything, he can do anything, he can get away with anything, you don't understand anything, and he's always right. Now we all go through that phase, but the terrorist never grows up. You can have a 25, 35, 45-year-old person who has the same general attitude. Now, one saving grace in all of this is that most of these people are incompetent. They're totally incompetent. I mean, look at the Japanese sarin attacks, how few people they kill. They shouldn't kill anybody, but that's beside the point. They wanted to kill a whole lot of people and they only killed 13. These idiots from the Middle East, they blew up the World Trade Center. There was about 50,000 infidels in that building they wanted to kill, and they only killed 6. And Timothy McVeigh wanted to avenge Waco by killing the people involved in Waco, the FBI and ATF. Yet their offices were someplace else. He didn't even know the right building. He was incompetent. And none of these people are competent because they have simply not grown up. They're immature. So when you're talking to one of these people, you're talking to a teenager who is maybe 10, 15 years beyond that stage, but he's got a glitch in his mind that doesn't work. Pipe bomb. They gave you a reason for making it as a diversion, and they also showed anybody with any sense at all, if you're going to do that, get rid of everything you use. So I mean, these are people who are really instructors in this thing. But I don't see anything wrong with that, because very few people do it. I mean, like I said earlier on, you haven't seen any more bombings as a diversion, and you may never. But because the terrorist, the person with the terrorist mind, is a unique individual. He's basically a person who has never grown up. He's never matured. And the saving grace in it is that he's usually incompetent. Like the people who blew up the embassy in Africa, they wanted to kill a whole lot of Americans. They only killed 12. They killed several hundred black people and injured a lot. But they didn't do anything that they could brag about because they're immature, they're stupid, and they're incompetent. Now, the only thing we have here that you people might need to deal with is these militia groups. And incidentally, when I made up the title of U.S. militia, I was totally ignorant of the fact that there were militia people running around. Otherwise, I would have given another title. But anyway, now, in 1964, I joined the John Birch Society, and I got kicked out. And then in 1965, I joined the Minutemen, which were a lot like the present-day militias. And in '66, I joined the American Nazi Party, became a uniformed stormtrooper. See, I was going to wipe communism out of the United States. Well, most of the people I ran with were a little crazy, but I wasn't willing to go for it myself, even though I had majored in journalism and been a reporter. And I worked in the nut house, but being with those guys was like being on duty 24 hours a day. And they were fun. Now, we really believed that the politicians in our country were going to be blackmailed by the Soviets into turning our country over to the Russians rather than have a war. You probably heard the phrase, better dead than red, and then they on the other side said better red than dead. And we took this very seriously, so we didn't want our country turned over to the Russians, and so we acted in a lot of irrational ways. Now, most of the Nazis I ran around with had this book, William the Bomb Disposal Guide. It was published in 1965, but they never used it. On the right, there were hardly any bombings of right-wingers. It was all the campus people that did that.
But anyway, of course, I finally got out of that, and for 30 years, there was no evidence of anything. And then I got on shortwave radio, a survival type thing, showing people how to take care of themselves and their loved ones and hopefully be an asset to their community so if the system collapses, as a lot of people believe it will, then they can ride it out. And the second night I was on, one idiot called me up and said, told me about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of UN troops hidden in the United States, ready to kick in doors and take guns, and this was 5 years ago. But even then I realized it was foolish, and these people have an idea that, well, it starts with the Jews. When I was in it, the Jews were backing the Soviets to take over the world, and the Soviets would turn it over to the Jews, and I never could figure out that because I was never against Jews. I never saw them as important people. But the whole thing was an anti-Jewish fraud. There was nothing to it. But these people now, they believe that the Jews are backing the UN and the feds to take over the world and so on and so forth. But these people hate the government. We didn't hate the government. We didn't make bombs. We didn't want to hurt innocent people. We certainly didn't want to cause anybody who wasn't involved in any sort of trouble. But what you've got now are really dangerous people because they believe that Jews are all over the place. They believe that UN troops are hidden in the United States. One guy called me up on the phone and said that his brother-in-law had saw 40,000 Russian troops in Montana. And stories that you wondered how anybody could believe, but you're talking to teenagers who've never grown up. And they are so paranoid. They believe that they're black helicopters blotting out the sun, and they're there driven by UN troops, and they're going to take patriots and take them to a concentration camp. And it is such a crazy bunch of idiot lies that I turned against them totally. And so in my program, I'm talking people out of this. It's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous. I was there in a way, and I'm talking these people out of doing it. And so I am the most hated person of the radical right. And maybe some of you have heard of Dees, the head of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, he makes his living exposing the radical right, but I'm at the top of his hate list because I'm talking these people away from the radical right, and that's taking away from his business. But anyway, when you talk to these militia people, what you ought to do, if you have the CD, read my article, You Can't Trust a Patriot. And it tells every argument they've got, and it puts it down totally. So you'll know what they think, and you can tell them, no, it's not true, and you can prove to them it isn't true. Now, the people who are on the fringes, you can talk away from there. The ones who are making a living at it, you can't say anything to them because some of them are idiots like Bo Grice, and others are just in it for the money. But they're spreading all over the place, and they get a lot of TV coverage, and the reporters want to keep the game going, so they don't really expose their stupid ideas. Like, for instance, one reporter was talking to John Trockman. You may have heard him on the Who's Like a Goat. And she asked him, he said, well, what about the UN troops in the United States? And so he says, well, there's a contingent of UN troops not 20 miles from here. Well, now that was the reporter's time to say, okay, let's get in a car and check them out. She didn't do it. Why didn't he say, we'll get in the car and I'll show them to you? They weren't there, but she didn't want to ruin the interview, so she let it go on, see? And then another time, he was talking to a reporter, and she was telling him, well, why would anybody need an ammonium nitrate bomb? And so he says, well, what if you got 20 tanks coming toward you? Well, if I had 20 tanks coming toward me, I'd just throw up my hands and say, what, did I do something wrong? But you can't fight tanks with ammonium nitrate bombs, but the guy's in the business. That's the way he makes his living. These people have a flock of sheep to shear, and that's what they're doing. And you people are going to be acquainted with these people from time to time, and you should recognize them as what they are. they are overgrown teenagers. They live in a world of fantasy. And when reality hits them in the face, then they could be dangerous because they want to prove that what they were thinking is true. But anyway, don't ever confuse a person's interest in this kind of material for criminality. He's probably just playing around like you played around with fireworks when you were a kid. And it could be dangerous, and all you got to do is say, well, look, what you're doing is illegal. If you're playing with this, stop it, get another interest, flower arranging, whatever. But don't mess with this kind of stuff, because you could kill yourself, you could hurt somebody else, you get a police record that'll never die. And if you're in any of these groups, get out. And that's my message to them, and I hope that I enlighten some of you people. And also, now see, this here book here is Keeping Score on Modern Prophecies, all the weird cults I joined on the occult. And it basically ties in with this malicious stuff, because again, these are mainly people who are immature, they believe anything, they believe wild things, and so this shows you how a teenage and an adult body believes crazy things. And once you realize how they think, you know what you're talking to, because you don't talk to these people like you talk to each other. You talk to them as if you're talking to a teenager, because that's what they are. So is there any questions? Nothing? Okay, there's no questions. I'll just say that that's the end of this. And if there's any of those left, if you want to pick them up, they're $25 to you, they're $50 retail. And if you study this, and if you have your patrolmen and your fire people examine them, then they're not only fun and interesting to examine, but they'll give you a very good sense of what all the paraphernalia for improvised weaponry consists of. And when you're searching somebody's place, you can tell by his work table what he's up to very easily. So, it's good night. You had a question?
Why don't you show some of the stuff on the CD?
Okay, Carrie? Well, let's see, we've talked about the, there's volumes 1 through 4 of the 4-man series Bond. And then there's 5 stories about Clarence. Now, Clarence is a mass murdering psychotic that everyone loves. He's a perfect terrorist. He can't be caught. He's a nut. And I finally sent him back to that place. But I gave him some fantastic weapons because I always wanted to write a fiction book on a person who used improvised weaponry. Because if you've ever seen MacGyver, well, he's an amateur. But Clarence is a professional. And a lot of good ideas in that. And we shot light in the streets, and the fireworks, the best things in fireworks. So incidentally, you saw that I'd blown my fingers off. We're suing NBC for telling the world that I'd blown my fingers off while making a bomb. I wasn't making a bomb at all. It happened September 29, 1969. I read a book, or a magazine from True West. It was a stupid article telling how Indians would go out on the battlefield, pick up spent shells and take them to their teepees and reload them, which of course was nonsense. But I figured, okay, maybe I can reload shotgun shells, and so I needed primer powder, and so I looked up Weingart's Pyrotechnics, which is in 4-man series Bond, and I got a paper cat mixture. Well, it's plainly said that all of the ingredients should be moistened, but I thought they had to be moistened just so you could drop them on the paper strips. And I didn't want them moistened, and so I was mixing less than a half an ounce of potassium chlorate, a little sulfur, and just a smidgen of red phosphorus, and I blew my fingers off because it detonates spontaneously. So I guarantee anybody who reads the 4-man series Bond 1 is not going to have that kind of mistake. But I wasn't making a bomb. In fact, I have never made an anti-personnel bomb. I've never been charged with a crime. I've never been in jail. So you can take me for what I actually am. I'm giving instructions mainly to people like you. And I remember when I published the Arson by Electronics, I went to the police department. I talked to the detective in charge,
And he loaned me the directory for all the police and fire marshals in the country. And so I sent them flyers about the poor man's James Bond and arson by electronics. And lo and behold, he got hundreds and hundreds of complaints from people all over the country, police and fire people. Said, what kind of person do you have there? What are you promoting this kind of material for? It was okay if the anarchists had it and were distributing it, but they didn't want their police and fire personnel to have it. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but the police and fire people are the ones who have to know this, because you can get killed if you don't know it. Because this is, I'm not trying to spread alarmism among you, but as things get worse and these crazy people multiply, you're going to have more and more of this nonsense. And when I was in the nut houses in attendance, incidentally, in 1964, the kind of people that you have to do with who were locked up. But then the liberals say, well, let's let them loose and give them medicines. Well, I had an article in one of these publications here, I think it's in this one here, the nut house syndrome. And it shows you how criminals and nuts are being released constantly. Most of the people you're dealing with, a lot of them are crazy, and they should be locked up in a nut house. But they're not. You read the nut house syndrome and it'll give you a good idea of that part of it. But yeah, Clarence and the Mighty Martian Slayer, and you like that article of You Can't Trust a Patriot, because, and when you talk to one of these so-called patriots, then you'll see he has a very organized line of propaganda, and none of it is true at all. The Jews aren't trying to take over the world. There are no hostile foreign troops in the United States. There are no concentration camps being set up. There are no black helicopters spying on patriots. The idea is so stupid that you wonder how anyone can think. I mean, say that you're one of these people and there's a helicopter above your house spying on you with the infrared. Well, you'd be out there looking at him. Well, what do you know about you? These people don't think because they just cloud their minds. Because like the teenager, they are totally right. They cannot be wrong. So you're talking to teenagers. Because teenagers, as you probably remember, especially if you have any teenage kids around, you do believe the most outrageous things. Luckily, if they're normal, they'll go out of it. But if they're not normal, then they're your problem. So is there something else? Here's the question.
I'd like to play devil's advocate here. No offense. You stated just a little bit ago that basically in your talk that you're providing the information for the law enforcement, fire, and so on, how to recognize these devices and for our betterment. My question is, why do you make it public to the general populace where all these, where you do have these so-called immature, crazy, teenager-type people, why do you make it available to them to create a problem for us?
Well, I don't make it available to create a problem for you. It's available anyway. And the thing is, since 1972, when I first published The Poor Man's James Bond, there hasn't been one instance of any innocent person being hurt because of it. And a person fantasizing over this material gets scared. There's two things. It leaves nothing to his imagination, so he doesn't have to experiment. Now, when I first put these out, I made a test mailing to every radical right and left-wing group, and I got no response. And I found that they don't want their people to have this material because their people are part of their flock of sheep to shear, and if they don't feel a need for their leader, then they won't pay. They'll get out of the group. So also, in volume 3 of The Poor Man's James Bond, you might read the article, Big Brother's Watching Lawrence. This teenager wrote me a letter, hand-scrawled, and he started out with The Poor Man's James Bond sucks. And it told him how to do everything. It gave him a power that he didn't want. And it scared him to death.
And he put me down and everything I had stood for down, and then he was going to get right with his mother's God, and he was going to be a good boy. And he was going to love Big Brother for the rest of his life, because he made that illusion to Big Brother. And so the paranoid types, the timid types, they are scared away from it. I mean, we've sold thousands of these tapes that you saw excerpts from, and people who get them, they see, oh my goodness, this is great, this is fun to think about, but they're scared to do it, and they don't do it. Of course, my underlying message is wait until you are personally threatened, until your territory is occupied by Martians or Russians or whatever. In the meantime, keep it on the shelf. Now, there was one nut called me. It sounds like just a funny story, but it was true, because I get a lot of calls from a lot of funny people. He told me that he got the poor man's bond because he wanted to kill a neighbor down the street. And so he was reading through the poor man's bond, and the material was too good for that neighbor. So he was going to raise his sights. He didn't like the governor. He went further on in the book. It was too good for the governor. Now, what about the president? Well, he didn't have the bus fare. Now, I don't know if he was, but it's a kind of material where you take a wimpy, insecure person, you give him a set of the poor man's bond, and it's like giving him an instant black belt in karate. He is now powerful. He can conquer any enemy. And so, you ever heard of a black belt karate go around beating up people? They don't do it because they can't. So this gives people a feeling of security. And so the thing is, I think one ATF man told me that I turned off more bombers than they had. Because when people read my material, then they don't need to experiment. They're also, a lot of them are scared by it. They have a feeling of power that they can use if they have to. And if the need doesn't arise, they're not going to use it because they're not going to jeopardize their knowledge. And if they're really wimps, they're scared to death. They don't want it. Like in my article I told about Rags. I had this dog, Dumbo, and we were walking down the road with Dumbo, and Dumbo was a loose dog. And here was Rags in his yard, a little fuzzy dog, and he was chained to his house. And so Rags was leaning up against his chain and barking the worst insults against Dumbo. Well, he's going to tear him to pieces. Of course, Dumbo hardly looked at him because a free dog will not pay attention to a chained dog. And so then, miraculously, the chain broke. Now he could get at Dumbo. Well, the little guy put his tail between his legs and slunk back in the house. Because he didn't really want to fight. All threats, but he didn't have what to back it up. So these people really get a benefit out of my work, because on the one hand it gives them power, on the other hand they're not going to jeopardize their power by misusing it, and on the other hand they're afraid to use it. And people write me orders and stuff that I can't even decipher, and they make them so secret. So as I said, if you give me a body count, we'll talk about it. I remember I was on 2020 and Tom Gerio went on that same general line, and I said, well, Tom, give me a body count. Well, that was shortly after the Oklahoma City bombing, and he didn't make an answer because he had no answer to make. And so I left the studio, went back home, and I watched it on TV. And after I had left, he had dubbed in his answer. Well, what about over 100 by that time, connecting me with the bombing in Oklahoma City? Well, Tim McVeigh didn't have the poor man's bond, didn't need it, but he was telling everybody that I was somehow responsible for that bombing, which of course was stupid, and he was a fraud. And of course, NBC, like I said, is getting sued, and my lawyer will collect. So I'm giving you people an overview. Now, if you want to distract yourself by thinking that I'm some kind of criminal, that's your problem. It's going to bite you. You have to be objective about the whole thing. Take all of these cases as individual cases. If you get a report some kid is playing with this kind of stuff, investigate it. If he's not a terrorist type, just tell him, look, hey, don't bother with this stuff because we're on to you. And if you're talking to a militia leader, tell him, hey, this is my territory. And if you or any of your guys crack in my territory, I'm going to be all over you. And you can forget your constitutional rights because it's going to be between you and me. You've got to talk to him like you're one of him. You don't talk over his head. The only way that you can counter these people is with counter threats. And they're afraid of threats, especially if they're in the business of recruiting immature types to join their militia groups. They don't want it. They don't want you to really know about them. But if you put them in the picture, then they're going to back off. And that's why I think that I have stopped a whole lot of people from doing a lot of really dumb things. They're waiting for the Russians or the Martians. And if that doesn't happen, you don't need to worry about it. But if you investigate some kid that's doing some dumb things, don't arrest them or anything like that. Just tell them, hey, look, this is dangerous. We know your name. Anything goes off in your neighborhood, you're going to jail. So just stop it. Just join something else, do something else, get another interest. And it works. You can do it. You're close enough to the people in your community, you can talk to them. Another question.
Said that McVeigh was unsuccessful in World Trade Center.
No, it wasn't McVeigh. He did the Muir building.
And the World Trade Center, you said these people were unsuccessful in both of those bombings.
Well, for what they wanted to accomplish. See, the Muslims wanted to kill a whole lot of infidels. There was about 50,000 people in the World Trade Center building, and they only killed 6. We don't want them to kill 6, but that's not the point. They didn't accomplish their objective. The people in Africa killed only 12 Americans. They wanted to kill everybody there.
What should McVeigh have done different in Oklahoma City? I mean, do you have an idea of what he should have done different that would have been more successful?
Well, if he had gone to the people who were actually involved in the Waco thing, and I point that out in my article, You Can't Trust the Patriot. See, he didn't have sense enough to go to the people that he was angry at. Of course, as I explained in the article, You Can't Trust the Patriot, the feds were not responsible for what happened in Waco. Koresh was an idiot. He had a cult. He had a lot of followers. He told them that he was the returned Jesus or whatever. And he got them into all these nonsensical beliefs. And then, one time, as I remember, they had ordered all kinds of material through UPS. And UPS delivered a box of hand grenades that weren't filled. You could reactivate them easily. And the box dropped on its corner, broke open, and the UPS man said, I don't want to get involved with this, so I'm going to tell the ATF. Well, the ATF got into it, got all excited, and so then Koresh was really getting investigated. Now, the sheriff's departments had heard stories of child abuse and everything like that, but they couldn't act on it without more direct evidence, and so they sort of let it go. But the ATF and the FBI were very excitable, and they got their signals crossed. They made a mess of it. They admitted that. And but the thing is, it was Koresh's fault. Now, Koresh, many people were leaving his compound, and more people were taking their kids out of there. And so he was faced with either going back to be a failed rock and roll musician or going out in a blaze of glory. And he chose a blaze of glory, so he orchestrated the whole thing. Now, all he had to do was to give himself up. All he had to do was to tell the ATF, come on, look in here. Do you think we got bad weapons? Well, okay, maybe the guys bought something they shouldn't have. Take it away, forget it. Nothing would have come of it. And the same way with Randy Hoover, 18 months. The feds fooled around with that guy. So all he had to do was just to give himself up. They'd give him a slap on the wrist for selling sawed-off shotguns, and no one would have been hurt. So, but Randy Weaver and David Koresh and all of their followers, again, were these immature people who joined cults, like the people joined cults in this, and I joined all the cults. Of course, I figured, well, there might be something to it, and it didn't take me long to realize that there was nothing to it, but they were fun people. And the people in there really believed it. But it wasn't the Fed's responsibility for what happened in Waco or Ruby Ridge or any of those things. The only failure of the Feds is that they don't understand how these people think. Now, I remember when I was a stormtrooper, my brother was a deputy sheriff. And so I told him, well, the FBI is very stupid because they interview me and they don't know what I'm talking about. Of course, I didn't either, but that's beside the point. But he said, well, they're not stupid. The thing is, the FBI, the ATF, Secret Service, all of these others, because he worked with them as a deputy sheriff, he says, when they join the force, they have to take a battery of tests, which shows that they're perfectly normal. The problem is they're too normal to relate to radical place. Well, they can't understand. I don't know if you've ever seen this Star Trek segment where Mr. Spock is on the planet and these furry creatures are trying to kill him and all like that. He messes up everything. The problem with Spock was he thought these people could be reasoned with. And that's the problem with the ATF and the FBI, with these people. They think you can appeal to them with reason. Well, they're acting in a totally unreasonable world. You might ask them, well, what color is the sky in your world? They just don't, they're so far away from reality, and here the FBI and the ATF, they're very good at what they do, crime for profit and so on like that. But when they're dealing with radical groups, you've got to be able to hunker down and understand the way these people think. And since I joined all of these groups and was with them for 3.5 years, having a ball, I know the way they think.